Videos like these are made possible by viewers like you, who support the channel through Patreon, channel memberships, and stream donations. And don't forget to check out the Bad Weapon Rehabilitation servers at www.badweaponrehab.tf. Check the links in the description for more information, and let's get into the video. Demoman is a class where I'm pretty set in my ways when it comes to how I play him. Regular demo is stock grenades or loose cannon depending on how spicy I'm feeling that particular day, plus quickie bombs and bottle, and full Demo Knight is almost always the Persian Persuader with the splendid screen. And when it comes to Hybridknight, you're pretty much always going to be seeing me with the Tide Turner, and quite possibly your best friend if you're going to be playing Hybridknight, the Claymore. This weapon has had a pretty contentious history. Back in the day, it used to have a flat 15 base health penalty in exchange for its most notable upside, increasing your charge duration for half a second. This was unique, but honestly not all that great, especially when compared to the stomping power of the Eyelander, and the other swords which had their own unique benefits. In Gunmetal, it was then given a buff that gave you 25% of your charge back on a melee kill, which was absolutely busted when used in conjunction with the brand new at the time Tide Turner, and it became one of the most powerful combos in the entire game. But then Tough Break happened, and things were never the same for the Claymore or Demo Knight in general. The Claymore itself was changed to be pretty easily the worst Demo Knight sword in the game, arguably one of the worst weapons in the game. The Tide Turner was dramatically nerfed, and the increased charge duration, the Claymore's most unique aspect, was removed, being replaced with a measly 25 health gained on kill. And as an extra kick in the teeth, the health penalty was replaced with a flat 15% damage vulnerability on all sources that actually gave you less effective health than the old flat health penalty. This put the weapon in an utterly bizarre state of being a weird hybrid between the Katana and the Persuader, while not being nearly as good at either of those swords' specialties. Hell, it was barely better than the damn Eyelander at just restoring your health. But in a rare move by Valve, in Jungle Inferno, the Claymore was largely reverted, with the 25 health upside being replaced by its old half-second charge buff again. As of right now, I'd say the Claymore is in a somewhat mixed state, and I'd probably call this the worst sword to use if you're playing full Demo Knight. There's two big reasons for why that is, and the first one is the damage vulnerability. While the sword was mostly reverted, the damage vulnerability while the sword is active remains the biggest downside of the weapon instead of the flat health penalty. This is a pretty awful downside for full Demo Knight since you're gonna constantly have your sword out. You literally don't have a choice in the matter, and so you're constantly going to be taking more damage from all sources. Sure, you have the shields which help mitigate the damage against a couple of those damage sources, but against bullets and melee, which Demo Knight already has no protection against, you're just screwed. In the worst case scenario with the Tide Turner's resistances, all you do is basically cancel out your vulnerability, making you roughly as good as a regular Demo Man at tanking fire and explosives. The Charge and Targe does the best at neutralizing this vulnerability against explosives and fire, but at the cost of having the most punishing recharge. No shorter recharge time, no extra shield bash damage, and no instantly filling it with a single melee kill. This brings us to the second biggest problem with the full Demo Knight Claymore: your lack of sustain. You're pretty much limited to making single picks on lone targets, and you're not going to have the speed, bulk, or stopping power to deal with groups of anything even remotely threatening. This is in sharp contrast to most other Demo Knight swords, which effectively have no downside if you're going full Demo Knight, unless you just count playing Demo Knight as being a downside compared to regular Demo Man, which I do. Only the Eyelander and Skull Cutter are similar in this regard, and even then, the Eyelander's downside disappears after 2 kills, and the Skull Cutter's downside is at least partially offset by the booties. The point here is that the other swords have options that keep you in the game after you make a kill, and don't just leave you a sitting duck. The Katana inflates your health pool, the Persuader lets you get in and out of fights basically whenever you want to, with both of these options basically functioning like the Kunai and Big Earner do on Spy by either letting you get out and fight another day, or use your increased health or speed to be even more aggressive. And the Eyelander is so brain dead that you can just roleplay as a pyro and be roughly as effective as one. The Skull Cutter comes in at a solid first for being even more brainless somehow, but a close second for being the worst full Demo Knight sword. The big difference being that if you continue to walk forward at people with the Skull Cutter, sometimes they just instantly die, compared to doing the same thing with the Claymore, where you have no advantages at all if you don't have a charge ready to go in that moment. Not to say that the Skull Cutter is better designed than the Claymore, the fact that your success is entirely based on luck is stupid, but the results in terms of effectiveness selectively speak for themselves. You have way more of a chance of getting out of a group fight alive with the Skull Cutter than you do with the Claymore. With the Claymore, you're counting on the 25% charge gained on kill from both the sword itself and the booties, bringing you up to 50% charge on a kill. This means even in the best case scenario with the fastest recharging shield, you're still waiting a few seconds after flinging yourself into the enemy lines at top speed to get the hell out of there alive, all while soaking up extra damage the entire time. The Claymore has nothing that encourages you to stay in a fight once you get a pick, and worse yet, nothing to keep you alive after you get one. At least with the Caber, you can take out multiple people in a single attack and then die right afterwards. With the Claymore, if you try the same thing, you'll get one guy at best. Hell, at least even the Pain Train only has a damage vulnerability against bullets, not everything, and it's still a less punishing vulnerability than the Claymores. All of this sounds pretty bad, and for full Demo Knight, it honestly is. The only real advantage the Claymore has against the other swords as a full Demo Knight is that charge duration, meaning you can get enemies outside of the range of other Demo Knights. Let's talk about that upside. Half a second doesn't sound like a whole hell of a lot of time for a charge duration, but considering how fast-paced TF2 is, and how fast you move while charging, half a second can make a big difference. It doesn't sound like that big of a difference, but it sure as hell feels like one. Maybe it's a relativity thing, the faster you go, the slower time moves around you. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, I'm arguably even a YouTuber. However, even though this can be a benefit by getting picks on enemies at farther ranges, which is absolutely a benefit to Demo Knight considering you're limited to only your melee, it can also be a detriment to enemies who would be in your normal pick range. Demo Knight's sword swings will deal mini crits in the middle of their charge instead of the full crits they get at the end of it. Meaning if you saw someone who would be in the crit range of any other sword, you basically need to reposition yourself or let the enemy reposition themselves to guarantee a crit on them. And keep in mind that during this whole hokey pokey process of waiting for the guy to get into the right position, you're just eating extra damage the whole time. Now in the old days, when the Tide Turner let you have full crits, god it feels weird to call those the old days, this really didn't matter since you could essentially just waste time schmooving around all over the place before you reach your target. This did mean that the enemy had an extra half second to shoot at you while you were zipping around, but it also meant that you were moving at the average speed of an animated Gmod character the entire time, so you were probably gonna be fine. These were the golden days of Ping Pong Demo Knight. The Persian Persuader does a pretty great job at it now, but this had all of the movement and none of the jank or risk of running over an existing ammo pack to kill your charge, or of a teammate picking up the ammo pack that's crucial to your success. I mean, there was still jank because it is still Demo Knight after all, but as someone who was around for this era of Demo Knight, let me tell you, it was fun to use, but absolute cancer to play against. All of the unfun parts about fighting against the pick class were exacerbated by the sheer frequency at which even novice Demo Knights could get crit kill after crit kill. Never mind that the fucking katana still had random crits back then. Jesus Christ, what were they thinking? The eventual nerfs to the Tide Turner affected the Claymore's effectiveness arguably just as much as they affected the Tide Turner itself. And the state of both weapons leads us to where we are today, with a similar synergy, but on a much more reasonable scale. A lot of the downsides of the Claymore either don't exist anymore, or just don't matter nearly as much when you use this as a Hybridknight weapon with the Tide Turner. Unless you're the kind of Hybridknight who runs around with his sword out more often than his grenade launcher, the damage vulnerability is actually a buff over the lower health pool. Now, when you're walking around with your grenade launcher out, there's no downside at all, and you only put yourself at risk when you're ready to make a pick. That's a very reasonable trade-off compared to constantly being at lower health for something you may not even be using all that often, and it means you get the full benefits of your shield's resistances while you're out shooting pipes. Another bonus is that you get all the benefits of the gap closing capabilities of the Claymore without having to worry about nickel and diming yourself over every hammer unit traveled in case you get a mini crit. Just use the Tide Turner and you'll get nothing but mini crits anyway, so who cares? Now you can close the gap on enemies you couldn't reach before, run away from fights you're not prepared to take on immediately afterwards, and confuse the hell out of your enemies with sheer unbridled mobility. That's not to discount the other shields though and act like the Tide Turner is the only option. Being able to get those critical hits can be very useful with the other shields, as well as the increased resistances, especially when you have a grenade launcher to back you up in case you get yourself into a jam. I just personally think that the Tide Turner is the most fun option, because even though it is much weaker now than it was in the old days due to being restricted to only mini crits, Ping Pong Demo Knight is still absolutely viable with the current Claymore. As mentioned earlier, the Claymore gets 25% of its charge back on a melee kill, and the Tide Turner gets 75% on a melee kill. So most enemies are usually one grenade away from being in the kill zone and ready for you to use to reclaim your charge. It's more rare to pull off a good ping pong than it is with the Persuader, but I think it's just as fun and doesn't punish you for using a grenade launcher like the Persuader does. And that's really the best part about the Claymore. It's so great for Hybridknight in particular. There's a wide spectrum of Demoman melee weapons in terms of what playstyle they most benefit, and I think the Claymore lands squarely in the Hybridknight specialist category. It obviously sucks if you're using it as a regular Demoman melee weapon, which the Bottle and Pain Train are much more suited for. It's not very good as a full Demo Knight weapon, you've got the Persuader and the Katana for that, but the problem with the full Demo Knight weapons is that they're much more punishing in letting you be freeform with switching between your grenades and your sword. The Claymore may not be as powerful as something like the Katana or the Eyelander, but it's also much less committal than either of those options. There's no ammo penalty, you can switch back and forth as much as you want between your grenades and your sword, and you're only more vulnerable while the sword is out. Not to mention you don't have to focus on getting heads like you do with the Eyelander, you can just use it as a backup tool. If you just want to play grenades demo with charge resistances, I'd still argue this is a great option because your charge escapes can be that much more effective by letting you run further away towards a potential safe spot or health pack. And I still don't really get trimping, but I know that this is a really good sword for it. More charge time while you're bouncing off of level geometry can only be a good thing. The Claymore has had a hard life. It started off as kinda bad, then became amazing, then the absolute worst of the worst, and now it seems comfortable. It's gone on a sort of hero's journey. It's grown and become strong from a place of humble beginnings, had a low point where it seemed all was lost, and then returned home, changed, but ultimately better in the end. Perhaps in a way, we are all like the Claymore. And in this video essay, I will explain how the Claymore is actually a scathing critique of a post-capitalist America.
Cyber, do a Peter Griffin impression.
It's me, Peter Griffin.
That's so good.
That's awesome.
Hey everyone.
Hey guys, it's me, Peter Griffin. It's me, Peter Griffin.
Do a Quagmire impression now.
It's me, Peter Griffin.
Hey, I'm Quagmire, guys. What's up, guys? It's me, Quagmire.
I love pizza burgers.
Giggity giggity. Giggity giggity, everyone. Now, subscribe to Disney Plus.